You're listening to the December 18th, 2015 edition of the Cybercrime and Business Podcast, the weekly podcast that's focused exclusively on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. On today's episode, we have an interview with Francesca Spidalieri. She is the Senior Fellow for Cyber Leadership at the Pell Center for International Relations and Public Policy at Salve Regina University. And she just wrote a report on the state of the states on cybersecurity. So we talk about what's happening on the state level and some good initiatives that different states are doing in regards to cybersecurity. Hello everybody out there, I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, and I'm here with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. As always, the Cybercrime Business Podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. We'll begin with that interview on the state's cybersecurity at the end of the podcast, but first, as always, we're going to jump into the top cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions from the past week.
Coming in number 3 this week, and there's going to be a common theme with this. Anonymous, for whatever reason, was active this week. The number 3 top trending industry target for the week was the European Space Agency. Members of Anonymous breached the web servers of the European Space Agency this week. The group said they carried out this attack as part of a Christmas prank. Funny, I guess. Data obtained from the breach was posted on justpaste.it, which is a code-sharing website. The hacktivist group made 3 separate posts. Thousands of users had their personal information shared online. We just must have a different sense of humor, I'm not sure. Coming in number 2, we have the Trump Organization. This was another attack by Anonymous. Anonymous actually started a new campaign that is specifically targeting Donald Trump, pretty much after all the rhetoric and everything he's saying about Muslims and, well, a lot of things, questionable things that Donald Trump's been saying in his presidential campaign. The group posted a video on YouTube that was targeted at Donald Trump and talked about Trump's controversial stance on Muslims and other things like I mentioned. So far, Anonymous has taken down the Donald Trump website with a distributed denial of service attack. Anonymous has also encouraged their followers to troll Donald Trump by using the hashtag #DashBags on Twitter. So I haven't actually checked out to see if anyone's been doing that yet, but that's just some more Anonymous news and this new Anonymous operation. And coming in at number 1, this one kind of surprised me. Normally with a top industry target, it's something I've heard of before, or it's like a big organization. This is a Dallas-based casual dining restaurant chain called Elephant Bar. The company confirmed this week that their point-of-sale systems were compromised by hackers. The restaurant chain has 29 establishments throughout 7 states, and every one of them were affected by this attack. The point-of-sale compromise took place between August 12, 2015 and December 4th, 2015. However, the company was alerted to this attack on November 3rd. It's currently unknown how many people were compromised or the exact information, but I think it's safe to say you could get payment card information and something like that. Those are the top trending industry targets for the week. Getting into today's discussion, obviously Christmas hasn't happened yet, but with the Christmas holiday, we also have New Year's, and around this time, many companies will have like certain predictions about 2016 or the coming year, and in cybersecurity, that's no different. You're going to see a lot of articles out there with predictions, and that has already started to happen. And Jeff and I thought that we would recap just some basic ideas that are being thrown out there or possible trends that we could see an uptick with in 2016. Jeff, you want to get us started off in that?
Yeah, this is our last podcast of the year, and we're going to be off the next couple of weeks for the holidays, but we'll be back on January 8th. So we thought it'd be interesting to wrap up with some predictions coming into 2016. I've been getting a lot of different emails from different companies, with their list of predictions for the year. And I guess I haven't really seen anything too surprising prediction-wise. The one thing that stood out to me is pretty much every single list and every single vendor that's put out some kind of prediction says something about ransomware and extortion. I don't know if you saw that too, Matt, when you looked, but I mean, obviously ransomware has been really growing a lot since, late 2013 is when it really kind of kicked off. And I think just in terms of predictions, it's not like we're really seeing anything new or some grand shift. I think we're just going to see a lot of the evolution of the stuff we've already been talking about quite a bit. In terms specifically of ransomware, there was a couple of things that I noticed. Christian Beacon, the McAfee threat report that they put out with predictions for 2016, he said that in terms of ransomware, they foresee a new focus on industry sectors, including financials and the local government, because they're going to quickly pay ransoms to restore critical operations. And then he said, they've already seen a little bit of criminals being quite effective in attacking those two sectors. He also said that they expect ransomware to start targeting Apple products in 2016, obviously due to its popularity as well. IBM researchers, they said that they believe that ransomware is going to be a common threat and profitable in 2016, kind of like no duh, great prediction. But their big thing was they were saying it's going to target mobile devices more as well. So we keep seeing a lot of this just in terms of ransomware. But I mean, even broader, you can kind of go out to just extortion in general. Over the past couple months on this podcast, we've talked about, Ashley Madison, all the extortion that's going on with there, with criminals basically sending emails trying to extort them. Then we had like the DDoS extortion attacks with the Armada Collective and DDoS for Bitcoin group.
Yeah, we are seeing a lot of that. Over the last couple weeks, there have been a lot of DDoS extortion attacks, like Jeff was saying, and a lot of companies. And it's actually kind of neat to read because a lot of these companies are actually refusing to pay the extortion. I think there's even a story like there's a company that kind of put out like a bounty on the people that said like, hey, go find this person. But this is an important topic because why are cyber criminals? Why is this going to be a popular attack vector for the foreseeable future? Well, it's pretty easy. Why implant malware, spend the money on malware just to try to steal info and then try to gain money from that, when you can just get paid right away through direct payment by a victim? You can just say, hey, pay me this money or I'm going to DDoS your system, or try to get out of like a ransomware. I'll decrypt all of your information. Why go through all the added effort when you can just do an attack like that? Or in a DDoS extortion attack, you don't even necessarily have to do an attack, and the victim might pay you anyway. So it's kind of a genius strategy by cyber criminals. Less effort and probably get more gain from it.
Ransomware is obviously on the rise. That's kind of an obvious one. Another one that I thought was pretty obvious, everyone's mentioning it. Just everyone's talking about more attacks on the energy and critical infrastructure. And that's something that seems like comes up again and again on this podcast. I mean, even going back to one of our first podcasts, over a year ago, that was what we talked about, was the rise of these nation states and more people getting in the game there. I got an email earlier this week with some quotes from Nathan Wensler. He's the executive director of security for Thycotic, and he's been on the podcast in the past. But that was one of his predictions as well. He said that the energy sector is going to be a ripe area for increased cybercrime in 2016. Until now, most of the hacks on things like chemical plants, oil refineries, and energy grids have been superficial and probing. But he believes that we're going to start seeing more hacktivists in nation states with the intent of actually producing damaging physical effects in 2016. I was reading CSO Online predictions, and this was probably I don't know if you call it the boldest prediction, but the one that stood out to me. I think they had a list of 16, and they said that 2016 will witness the world's first openly declared cyber war, where the primary goals of the attackers, like hacktivist nation states and terrorists, are not financial, but the goal is instead to cause physical damage in support of terrorists or geopolitical agendas. Getting back to things like ISIS and the different threats of other nation states or hacktivist groups like that.
See, now that's a prediction. Jeff and I talk to a lot of people, and sometimes, we'll get some predictions. Yeah, they're valid points, but it's kind of what everyone already knows a little bit. Now we're predicting cyber war. I hope that doesn't happen, though.
Well, I remember last year, though, like sometimes the companies do this just for the headlines. Like there was this one company, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but they predicted for a couple years in a row we're going to see the first death due to a cyber attack. They talked about hacking into internet-connected ovens and flooding a house with gas and blowing it up. And, I think it's just a little bit of fear-mongering personally.
Well, yeah.
Because really a lot of, it's just the new date on the calendar. It's not like suddenly everything's going to shift because,
right.
It's tomorrow. But one interesting thing that Nathan Wensler pointed out, he said that he was just talking about the global economic downturn being a catalyst for increased cybercrime. He said in the email that obviously everyone knows Russia's a hotbed for training cybercriminals and cybercrime and all that. But he was saying that as unemployment rises in 2016, that we're very likely to see a sharp increase in the number of hackers seeking their fortunes from unauthorized entry into, financial service organizations and other enterprises and, just more cybercrime just because of the economy. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing I never really thought about.
If we could take just maybe a side note here quick. I mean, I don't want to come off as, I like to think I'm pretty knowledgeable in cybersecurity and the cyber realm in general, but I have a prediction, Jeff. Can I entertain the
If you want to be so bold, we'll have to play the podcast back next year, see if you're correct.
And this is a hopeful one, guys. This is good. I think one of the main trends we might start to see will be almost a sense of civic duty in cybersecurity. If you read a lot of articles and you read reports and surveys, you find that a lot of IT personnel and CISOs, one of the things they say, one of the most vulnerable parts of their organization are the people that work there. People are simultaneously an organization's greatest asset, but also in cybersecurity, they really are probably the biggest threat. And I think in 2016, with all this news that we have, with every, some of the things that have happened, I mean, this year, what we had the OPM breach, we had Anthem, millions upon millions of people. And that's been since the scenario in previous years as well. I really think that there is, in 2016, you're really going to start to see, I don't want to say a revolution, but a real uptick with people that are really starting to get it. In a sense, you're still going to have some ignorance out there, people not understanding, the threats. But I really think that we're going to see something concrete that says people are starting to learn the lessons of the past. Today, I actually interviewed Orlando Scott Cowley of Mimecast about this very topic. We chatted, about this civic duty, this personal responsibility when it comes to cybersecurity. We also talked about, maybe there's going to be a shift in the way employers hire people or hold people accountable, but I'll be writing an article about that within the next couple of days. People can read that. One of the things Scott Cowley said, he said something pretty interesting, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts. Scott Cowley said, quote, "I think we will come close to having over 1 billion records being breached in 2016. We were close this year. I think the number was right over 800 million. I think we will see a big uptick in the leveling of social engineering that organizations face." One of the big things that he pointed out, and we talk about, are cyber criminals kind of changing tactics, and we've talked about this. He went on to say that, and I think one of the biggest attacks we'll see in 2016 will be whaling in particular. Whaling is a social engineering technique. Cyber criminals social engineer their way into a network, posing as like a boss or CEO, and they attack like senior accountant and financial staff members, and they try to get them to like wire money and things like that.
I'm just curious, did he actually say whaling, or did you bring up that term first?
He said whaling.
Because that's so weird. We were talking about it on last week's podcast about, the FBI calls it business email compromise, and last week was the first time I ever heard the term whaling, and now I guess it's catching on. Everyone's calling it whaling now.
Right. And and the last point that Scott Cowley mentioned was, quote, "It has just become so easy for people to exploit other people without requiring any type of code or any type of malware in an email." And I happen to agree with this 100%. It's, we just kind of mentioned that cyber criminals, they don't need a whole lot of tools in their arsenal to hack an organization. I think because of that, we're really going to see something's going to happen, Jeff. I feel it. I'm excited about it. I really see something changing next year. We're just going to see, even if it's just a little bit, we're going to see awareness start to rise.
Well, you might have more faith in people than I do.
I do. Maybe I think I might, yeah. I'm excited about it.
Another prediction that I saw in terms of social engineering was Christopher Hadnaggy. He was on our special episode we had about social engineering probably about a month ago or 2 months ago. He had a quote that I saw in an article, and on the podcast he was talking about vishing, which is basically like phishing over the phone. And a lot of people that we spoke to on that podcast were saying how that's really been on the rise the last, I think like 18 months or so. And he was quoted as saying that he fears that there's a lot more vishing to come this year. And he also thinks that we're going to see more multi-vectored attacks on the rise. And that's a lot of times what we're seeing in some of these like whaling types attacks. You send an email, you do a phone call, you kind of get information from multiple ways. And then he also says that he thinks we're going to see a higher level of sophistication in these attacks, as well as a larger number of banking-related scams overall.
So another area in 2016 that could potentially get worse, might not. It's a prediction. According to Javelin Strategy and Research, card not present, or CNP fraud, will grow from $10 billion in 2014 to more than $19 billion in 2018. The increasing adoption of EMV cards and digital wallet solutions, such as Apple Pay or Google Wallet, I think there's even a Samsung option, will reduce point-of-sale system fraud and counterfeit credit cards. Unfortunately, that will push more fraudsters online to monetize fake and stolen credit cards. And I think we've kind of seen this already. Jeff and I have mentioned frequently this year that there's still POS malware data breaches that have occurred. But if you compare 2015 to 2014, there has been nearly as much, and or at least we haven't talked about it as much. And so, the shifting of attacks can just occur in other areas in other ways.
Yeah, and a lot of these predictions, like we're saying, they're really nothing new. It's kind of stuff we've been talking about all year long. I guess in terms of what I'm curious about the most going into 2016. We've been, covering a lot of the legal stuff on the podcast lately, and, I write about that every week and put blogs up on LinkedIn and stuff about it. And so I'm just interested to see how all this legal stuff develops. We've had all these different court cases this year, like the Neiman Marcus ruling, where, talking about data breach standing and whether plaintiffs have the right to sue. You have the FTC getting involved and these other agencies. And I think, especially over the past 6 months, we've starting to see a lot of case law regarding this kind of develop and starting to solidify some things in terms of, what are best practices and things that companies should be doing. And I think, in 2016, that's going to solidify even more. So it'd be interesting to see how that develops.
Moving on to advisories, we're going to start off with Arbor Networks. They recently put out a report on the Black Energy malware family. The malware dates back to 2007. Back in 2007, it was almost exclusively for DDoS. And then in 2010, Black Energy 2 emerged, which helped it expand to things like info stealing and web-based banking attacks. Now, Arbor Networks is saying that some research believe a full-blown Black Energy 3 has evolved. Now, Arbor examined just one particular Black Energy 2 plugin, which they say allowed Black Energy 2 botnets to launch true distributed NTP reflection amplification attacks.
Yeah, Matt, and I was reading that report this morning, and I got an email about it, and basically Arbor Networks says that these amplification attacks, which basically, allow you to get a bigger, badder DDoS attack, I guess is the way to explain it. They said that this may represent one of the first command and controlled Windows botnets to correctively and effectively implement an NTP-based amplification attack. So, like we said, these attacks are responsible for some of the largest volumetric DDoS attacks that are observed on the internet. At the end of the report, they conclude that by combining these powerful amplification methods with the use of traditional Windows botnets, that it's possible that this Black Energy could manage to increase the intensity of these attacks. Which I thought was pretty interesting because we were talking about a different report last week where they were talking about how, DDoS is more widespread but less powerful. So this would kind of be a tool, I guess, to make those attacks more powerful again. But then they went on to say, in addition, it seems clear that development of additional forms of amplification attacks could be well within the capabilities of the authors of the malicious code. And that it might just be a matter of time before we see additional plugins that are, derivatives of this new effective plugin and use those to do other amplification attacks and botnets and stuff. Yeah, that's kind of a little prediction from Arbor Networks on, where some aspects of DDoS could be heading going into 2016.
Moving on with advisories, we got a few other ones that we saw throughout the week. We have a malware spam that leads to the Tesla Crypt ransomware. Hackers are using a very familiar tactic to infect computers with ransomware. In recent spam attacks, they're using the subject title, "Your Attention Required," catchy, gained my attention, to trick innocent people into opening an email and clicking a malicious attachment. The sender names varies, and the body of the email contains information about special prices on certain items that are allegedly at your request. The email provides a link to click on. Look, that's the malicious attachment. Once the link is clicked, the user is then vulnerable to the Tesla Crypt ransomware.
Yeah, there's also more malvertising. Pretty much every week, Malwarebytes and other companies are spotting new malvertising campaigns. They spotted one this week that was targeting users of Comcast. There was a malicious ad that was spotted on Google AdWords, which advertised basically with the title DirecTV compared to Comcast TV. And then when users clicked on it, they were directed to another website. Same thing we usually hear. There's an exploit kit, in this case, a nuclear exploit kit. And then the exploit kit would then go on to install this CryptoWall ransomware. The interesting thing about this is that after the users were infected, another website would then load that looked identical to the real Xfinity portal. And then from there, they would get a pop-up message saying that Comcast Security's plugin has detected suspicious activity from your IP address and trying to get them to call tech support. So this actually goes right back into what Christopher Hadnagi was saying. You have multiple things going. You do like a phishing attack, or in this case, a malvertising attack, and then you go from there, you try to get them on the phone, and another phishing attempt. So a lot of these kind of multi-vector attacks going on.
Moving on to legal news for the week. And we got an update on a CISA bill, and I'm just going to read a quote from a Wired article. In a late-night session of Congress, House Speaker Paul Ryan announced a new version of the Omnibus Bill, a massive piece of legislation that deals with much of the federal government's funding, and now includes a version of CISA as well. Lumping CISA in with the Omnibus Bill further reduces any chance for debate over its surveillance-friendly provisions or a White House veto. And the latest version actually chips away even further at the remaining personal information protections that privacy advocates had fought for in the version of the bill that passed the Senate.
The whole idea behind the bill is to basically to incentivize businesses to voluntarily share threat data with the federal government and with one another. There's different legal or different liability protections in there. And then the bill also establishes a process for the government to share threat information with businesses. So that's sort of the idea behind it. It's a good thing, but then at the same time, some people are not too happy about some of the privacy and calling it more of a surveillance bill than an actual cybersecurity bill.
Wasn't there something with the Office of Personnel Management in this legislation as well?
Yeah, it's weird because no one was really talking about it, but I saw an article on NextGov, and I wanted to actually find what the bill actually said. So I actually went to the bill. You can find it online. The thing's over 2,000 pages long. There's a search function, so I just searched for Office of Personnel Management.
Yeah, right.
And buried on page 562, they have this provision in there that says that each individual affected by the breach is going to get complimentary identity theft protection coverage. Now, previously, I think it was just like 1 year or 3 years, depending on, sort of the level of where you fell. But according to this, it has to be effective for a period of not less than 10 years and include not less than $5 million in identity theft insurance.
That could be a costly venture.
Yes. And then moving on, just to highlight a couple of other legal stories, fines and settlements and stuff that made big headlines this week. Everyone's favorite company, Comcast. We've already talked about them a little bit. The state of California has reached a $25.95 million settlement with Comcast over allegations the company unlawfully disposed of electronic items, as well as discarded records without first omitting or redacting private customer information. According to the press release that I saw, Comcast routinely sent electronic equipment to landfills that were not permitted to receive the items. The investigation also uncovered that Comcast discarded documents containing sensitive customer information, including names, addresses, and phone numbers, apparently put them into the trash without shredding them, or making them unreadable, potentially exposing the information to identity thieves. The $26 million settlement still needs to be approved by the court.
Next, we have the University of Washington Medicine to pay $750,000 in a Hipaa settlement. The settlement was between the University of Washington Medicine and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights. And this stems from a 2013 incident where an employee downloaded an email attachment leading to 90,000 individuals having their electronic protected health information accessed. The investigation found that the University of Washington Medicine did not ensure that all of its affiliated entities were properly conducting risk assessments. The settlement includes the fine, a corrective action plan, and annual reports on the organization's compliance efforts.
And then one last lawsuit that we saw this week that people might care about is Excellus. They are facing another class action lawsuit over a data breach that involved more than 10 million customers. The lawsuit has been filed against Excellus BlueCross BlueShield and Lifetime Healthcare. According to Tamara Burns at Top Class Actions, who wrote this article I read, she said the lawsuit is now part of a group of at least 5 potential class action lawsuits that have been filed in New York's Western District that accuse Excellus of negligence, breach of contract, and Hipaa violations. So that'll probably be an ongoing thing to see if anything comes out of that 10 million strong data breach. I believe that was it for this week's cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions other than our funny story of the week. If you found anything there, Matt?
It's more, this week is going to be more of a rant, just because I don't quite understand. But it's holiday season. People are still shopping. I know I don't have all my Christmas shopping done yet. There's a hot toy on the market for kids, and it's called Hello Barbie. We've seen Barbie, go through quite the progression over the years. This Barbie kind of takes imagination completely away, and it actually uses the internet to listen to children, talk to them, and then it comes up with an artificial intelligence response. So kids can talk to this Barbie. Sounds great, right? That's what we're moving to. Toys just kind of play for you. There's a problem with this Barbie, though. According to several cybersecurity experts, this toy has several flaws. Some of the flaws would allow cybercriminals to actually listen in to conversations between the Barbie and the child. It can also help hackers pinpoint the exact location of the Barbie. Some of these flaws have been fixed. But here we go again. We have this, in my opinion, an unnecessary internet-connected toy that leaves you vulnerable. And it leaves you vulnerable to some of the creepers out there who probably want to listen to these kids talking to dolls. So I think we need to go back to an era like Jeff and I. We're probably the last generation that could go outside in our little neighborhood and throw a football around or play Ghost in the Graveyard or something at night. You just don't do that anymore. You got these weird toys. Sorry to anyone out there that's actually bought one, though. I'm not criticizing you. I just think the toy's weird.
Anytime there's something that happens with a data breach or privacy, there's a lawsuit, and there is a lawsuit over this Hello Barbie doll as well. So we'll see if they get into any trouble over that. All right, now moving on, we have our interview with Francesca Spidalieri, the Senior Fellow for Cyber Leadership at the Pell Center for International Relations and Public Policy at Salve Regina University, and we talk about her report, The State of the States on Cybersecurity.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Most things that I read regarding government cybersecurity are always focused on the federal level. So I thought it was pretty interesting that, you guys are focusing on the state level. What made you decide to examine the state of the state's cybersecurity?
Well, Jeff, you're absolutely right. I thought that was a terrific question because we hear normally on a daily basis news of successful hacks and data breaches affecting usually large companies and federal agencies. But if you really think about it, first of all, state and local government, just like the federal government, they hold information of millions of people and depend on information communication technologies and the internet now to provide a number of essential services to their citizen, to maintain critical infrastructure as the public utilities and to share information across states and federal networks and to make sure that first responders receive the data they need in crisis situation. I can tell you I work here in Rhode Island a lot with the emergency management agencies, and that's one of their first concerns. And again, if you think about it, a lot of that critical service and personal information are actually in the hands or under the jurisdiction of local and state government. In fact, I always tell our audience here at the Pell Center that although 90% of critical infrastructure is actually in the hands of the private sector, that infrastructure is ultimately located under the jurisdiction of states. And those states are responsible for preventing, protecting, mitigating, responding to cyber incidents. Or we're becoming more and more aware and requesting of our states to be more responsible. And third point I always unfortunately make is that we are aware of the gridlock in Congress in passing any type of cybersecurity-related bills. So, for all these reasons, we have to recognize that cybersecurity cannot be tackled only at the federal level. And states can't just wait for the federal government to provide all the responses and solutions before taking action. Now, in regard to my specific report on the state of the states on cybersecurity, I originally started the research because I had been appointed by the Rhode Island Governor, Gina Raimondo, to her newly established Rhode Island Cybersecurity Commission. Now, the commission that has been working since just this past May had been tasked, among other things, with looking at other states to see what were other successful examples that they use to strengthen their cybersecurity posture, to promote the growth of a cybersecurity industry, and to develop a dedicated cybersecurity workforce to serve that state local industry. And my first task, actually, as a commissioner, was to review efforts by other states to establish similar commissions, to develop innovative solutions, ways to improve the state preparedness, mitigation, response, and resilience, and to grow, as I said, their cybersecurity industry and attract the right talent. So as I was doing that research, I had the opportunity to talk to many CISOs and CIOs and other state representatives across the nation. By the end, I had such an incredible amount of research and interviews that it seemed a waste not to put it together into a report for everybody to see and consult. And as I said, in the future, hopefully, we'll continue to expand.
Yeah, so the states you looked at then in the report, I believe there was 8 of them. The idea is, these are the states that are doing the best, that you found, good takeaways that you could implement in other states. Is that correct?
Yes. So the questions I often get, why did I pick those 8 states and how I picked those 8 states? Well, so there are a lot of states, I think, actually, among the 50, they are doing interesting things. They're not always necessarily part of our overarching plan. Sometimes efforts are only going in silos. But I was looking for states, as you said, that they were able to devise innovative solution, effective mechanism to improve cyber resilience, and really to turn cybersecurity challenges into an opportunity for the states. So the states that I selected for this first study were chosen because they recognize the importance of cybersecurity, because they've already prioritized the development of cybersecurity strategies and policies, and because they've shown to commit at least some resources to increasing the resilience to cyber threats. I then created a methodology to try to be as objective as possible and evaluate state maturity and commitment to cybersecurity. And that's how I picked those 8 states. They were pretty much the ones that scored the highest on this methodology. In fact, actually, a good chunk of the time was spent developing an objective methodology that would allow me to identify and map effective mechanism, creative solution that states had and their leaders have already devised to take advantage of some of the existing assets, protect their critical infrastructure, promote information sharing, grow their cybersecurity industry, attract qualified talent. Unfortunately, if you think about it, of all the 50 states, really only 8 states really stood out. So we're still not doing well enough.
Yeah, I want to get into some of the positive aspects in a minute, but I guess first, I was reading an article of yours this morning. You were quoted as saying it's a grim picture. After doing all this research, I'm wondering if there's any, big picture takeaways that stand out to you in terms of the challenges that are facing the states overall in terms of cybersecurity?
Sure. Well, again, states, just like the federal government, first of all, they're becoming increasingly the victim of a number of cyber threats, and we can read more about it. It might not be the front page news, but if we dig, they are becoming more and more the victims of data breaches, tax fraud, political hacktivism, and all of those are degrading their economy and they're threatening their security. And then, unfortunately, just like federal agencies, most state and local government agencies are unprepared to respond to a lot of these threats. There have been recent reports, aside from mine, that have shown that federal agencies constantly see persistent weaknesses in information security, and they lack strong cybersecurity measures. And states can be even worse, with the exception of a few, because sometimes they haven't even addressed or recognized that there is a need to secure their IT system and address cyber threats. So some of the common challenges that I've identified among all states is, first and foremost, as you can imagine, insufficient funding. So even when there are programs and plans underway, they're mostly poorly funded. There is an increased volume and sophistication of cyber threats. We read about it every day. There is a shortage of qualified cybersecurity professionals, and states like the federal government are constantly competing with the private sector that can pay higher salaries. And there is a lack of strong leadership, because that made a really big difference in states when leadership at the gubernatorial level and congressional level took cybersecurity seriously and decided to do something about it in their states. So that's kind of the big picture and common challenges among all those states.
Yeah, there was a lot of information in the report, so I thought probably the easiest way to sort of touch on some of the topics would be to run through the 5 different sections that you identified and see if there's anything that stands out to you or anything that the states are doing right in regard to that. The first one is State Cybersecurity Strategic Plan, and it seemed to me from the graphic and the measurements in the report that that was probably maybe the most lacking area. And in the report you wrote that Michigan is the only state to have an actual cybersecurity strategic plan. So just wondering, what is Michigan doing that stands out there, and, what can other states learn from that?
Well, so as I said before, I was trying to create an objective methodology to assess the states, and I do believe that the first and most important area that indicates a state's cyber readiness is the articulation and publication of a state cybersecurity strategic plan, kind of an umbrella that covers all the other initiatives and a test for all of them and makes linkages among all of them. And that plan should align first and foremost the state economic vision with its security imperatives. Those two are not two disconnected things and should not be divorced. In fact, I think a plan should include the specific cyber threats that the states face and the necessary steps, programs, and initiatives that should be undertaken to address those cyber threats and increase resilience. I think there should be a strong linkage to the economic health of the state and the implication of the cyber threats to it. I think a plan should clearly identify the competent authority, which is another thing that it's missing in a lot of states, whether it's a person or an office, that it's clearly responsible for ensuring that the plan is implemented and executed. And then that they need to adopt some well-established benchmarks or other types of standards and policies, such as the NIST framework, to have common standards of cybersecurity. So yes, I do think that that's probably the most important area and one that lacks in most states. Almost all of them. Most states have an IT strategic plan, but that doesn't mean that it's cybersecurity. Some states just mention in passing that it's a need that they need to address, but they don't actually have a plan.
Yeah, so after strategic plan, the second category was incident response. Was there anything that stood out to you in regards to responding to cyber incidents?
I think that was an interesting case because if you see the history of some states, you could clearly identify the ones that are focusing the most. In fact, the New York state, for example, after 9/11, heavily focused on their incident response. And I think they've been among the most successful in doing that because they connected the dots. They got all the different agencies to talk to one another. Their National Guard, their local fusion center talks to the state police. That's where the CISA was originally started and where it's still located. So again, incident response, I think it's really, really important, but that's not always been the primary focus of other states like California or Virginia, Maryland. They're very much focused on the economics and growing the industry. And as I said before, those two things cannot be disconnected, the national security imperatives to the economics of a state.
Then the third category was e-crime and law enforcement, and it seemed to me, looking at the chart and the way that you, graded each state, that was perhaps the most solid area overall. Do you agree with that?
All states have, at this point, some kind of crime unit within their state police. 47 out of 50 states have a data breach notification law. So yes, all states have some kind of policies and laws, and certainly an engagement by their police and regulatory bodies within the states that is looking into cybercrime and starting to address it. Again, it doesn't mean that they're doing that well in training all police officers, judges, and other forensic specialists and legislators in cybersecurity threats and cybercrime. But there is something going on, at least at the basic level, where there's like data breach notification law, a crime unit within the state police in most states, almost all.
Yeah, and then the fourth category was information sharing, and that's something that we hear about at the federal level all the time, the need to share that information. So is there anything that surprised you in regards to that?
Again, information sharing, we all talk about it. We don't always know what it exactly means. And there are actually some great examples at the state level of effective partnership where information sharing has really made a difference. In some cases, the state fusion centers have taken the lead. We now see the emergence of different ISAO and different ISACs, different integration cell, cybersecurity integration cell. And those are exploring new ways, new platforms to share information. I think we should pay more attention because we can learn a lot from some of those state examples. I would particularly pay attention to Virginia setting up the first ISAO at the state level, New Jersey to set up a cybersecurity integration cell, and it's incubating their police fusion center all within this new body.
Yeah, and then the final category was cyber R&D, education, and capacity building. What specifically were you looking for here, and who is doing it well?
Well, I believe states have a role to play in investing and providing incentives for cybersecurity research and development. There is a lot they can do in terms of tax credit, scholarship, and other funds they can dedicate it to university and even K-12 programs to promote the study of cybersecurity, information security, and others similar programs. State can also partner with academia, public and private sector entities to promote cyber innovation. And again, there are some great examples in this case. First example comes to mind is certainly Maryland, and how successful they've been in launching the first National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. I believe is the most successful partnership between academia, state, and the private sector. And other states, I know, Rhode Island, for example, are exploring following suit on that example. We need to create the future workforce, and we need to create better products, and we need to innovate, and a lot of efforts are at the state level.
We covered a lot of territory here, so I just wanted, final thoughts or anything that stands out to you to wrap it up.
So although I said there is a grim picture because only 8 states really stood out of 50, I think states have a great potential to do a lot. They have some unique elements that should be further strengthened. And I will continue to look, especially at the states that I highlighted in my report, and others that are up and coming because they've recently formed similar commissions and committee to look at some of these issues. And again, I wouldn't wait just for the federal government to come up with all the response and solution before taking action. And again, some of the states really impressed me with their commitment, dedication. None of them got it all together. None of them is scored a perfect score on the methodology that I developed. But there are some dedicated commission, councils, and task force that are looking at these issues and coming up with creative solutions. There are some interesting examples of how the National Guard is being used, for example, to combat cyber attacks and respond to cyber incidents. And I will look more into those units that are taking more and more of their responsibilities. And I would certainly continue to focus and look in the special partnership between industry, academia, and state agencies to promote cyber industry growth, attract federal fundings to local universities and companies, and to train a new generation of cybersecurity professionals.
And that'll do it for this week's Cybercrime and Business podcast. Big thanks to Francesca Spidalieri for stopping by and filling us in on the state of the state's cybersecurity. Just a quick programming note, we'll be off the next 2 weeks for the holidays, but Matt and I will be back in January with your weekly podcast of cybercrime news and interviews with different cybersecurity experts. As always, the Cybercrime and Business podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact to their business, and proactively address threats head-on. If you enjoy this podcast, you can find more episodes on iTunes, YouTube, and all the major podcasting sites. And for more information on cyber threat intelligence, check out surfwatchlabs.com.